Well, welcome, and our topic now is a very important one about regional collaborations, opportunities of major universities to work closely with other universities, federal assets, civic authorities, industry, and to try to coordinate new opportunities through this close collaboration. We have an excellent panel today, and all are very experienced in this area. First, to my immediate left, James Holloway is the Provost and Executive Vice President of the University of New Mexico. He's a nuclear engineer, and he earned his doctorate in engineering physics at the University of Virginia, and then went on after a short time on the faculty at UVA to become a chaired professor at the University of Michigan, where he spent quite a bit of his career. And he also there served as Vice Provost for Global Engagement and Interdisciplinary Academic Affairs, which I think is quite relevant to this topic too. He has taught technology development not only in the United States, but also in Ghana and in Thailand. And again, that international experience I think is outstanding. He has been very much involved in neutron and photon radiation transport theory and modeling. And he was inducted into the Order of the Engineer in 2003. Quite an honor. So it's wonderful to have him on the panel.
Thanks, Bob.
To his left, Richard Lange, president of the Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center in El Paso. And he's also president of the Paul L. Foster School of Medicine in El Paso. And he had earned his medical degree at UT Southwestern in Dallas. And after internship and residencies, he went on to Johns Hopkins University for his fellowship in cardiology, and then returned to the University of Texas Southwestern to join the faculty of cardiology and became the fellowship director and the director of the Rappaport Center for Cardiovascular Research. He has also served as the vice chairman of medicine and director of educational programs at UT Health Sciences in San Antonio. I think quite notably, he has published over 400 articles in refereed journals, books dealing with heart disease. And he was, I think, very interestingly, when it comes to public communication, responsible for the first medical podcast worldwide. TTU Health Watch is what it's called now. And it's published weekly with Johns Hopkins University for the last 19 years, I believe. So we have quite a remarkable panel. I'm sorry to have to announce that, that Heather Wilson, who's president of the University of Texas, El Paso, and former Secretary of the Air Force, won't be able to join us today. She sends her regrets, but she's recovering from an illness and will not be able to be with us today. But I think certainly one thing that will be quite interesting is how much the collaboration between UTEP and TTU HSC in El Paso has been so productive to that area. So maybe starting with that, Rick, would you care to kind of summarize some of that collaborative activity?
It's Rob, thanks for that kind introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm an MD. To be associated with inventors is a real treat for me, and it's very humbling as well. Because Heather's not here, I'll tell the story jointly for both of us, and it's unique. The health science center I'm at is relatively young. As a health science center, it's only 10 years old. We have a medical school, a nursing school, a graduate school, and the first dental school in Texas in the last 50 years. Again, it is one of the 5 systems in the Texas Tech system. Well, right across town from me is University of Texas El Paso, where Heather is the president. It's an R1 Carnegie Research Institution. It has about 24,000 students in it. 94% are minority. It's really the only college that I'm aware of that's on the that's on the U.S.-Mexico border. And by the way, we are as well. I tell people, if you give me a golf ball and a 3-wood and 3 swings, I'll have it in Mexico from my office. I'm that close. And so when Heather came to be president at UTEP, she had a distinguished career as a representative, congressional representative in New Mexico for 5 terms, and served as the first woman secretary of war in Afghanistan uh, embedded in her, or actually honed her leadership skills with regard to collaboration and cooperation. I had the opportunity to participate in a leadership group by Stanley McChrystal, 3-star general who was the director of the Joint Operations Special Task Force. And Heather was there, a part of that task force as a part of the Air Force. And what they had to do was all branches of the service had to work together in a unique way to make sure that our fighting forces were faster, flexible, and fitter than ever before. So from that came a book called The Team of Teams. So when Heather came to UTEP, I had been at Texas Tech for about 2 years. They have resources, equipment, expertise that we don't have. We have medical expertise that they don't have. And so Heather and I, even before she started, committed to working together to build that collaboration. You can imagine a young university, an old one, 2 different systems, a lot of finger pointing, not a lot of collaboration. So we set out to change that. The first thing we did was we had all the deans and vice presidents of research over to my house for wine. I opened the best wine. Heather and I gave the task, we're going to work together, and your future, your success depends upon how well we work together.
Wow.
From that, we established, Heather and I both put $100,000 in the pot. There were $200,000 to fund seed grants, and those seed grants had to be collaborators from each institution. From 18 different seed grants, we chose 8 grants that would each receive $25,000 for the first year, with the intention of providing an update at 6 months, a final update in a year, which, by the way, will be this month, and with the intention of furthering future grants. As a result of those 8 seed grants, there have been 15 other grants submitted, 3 to the NIH and the NSF. They've had 8 different presentations at national meetings, 7 different manuscripts that have already been accepted from that. And 2 of those, by the way, Heather and I were so successful, have committed another $100,000 from each institution. 2 of those grants will go to receive another $50,000 to get them across the finish line to make this work. Now, I want to highlight one other thing. Rob was very nice to introduce James and me, but he and Annie very graciously set up a fund. I'm going to let you describe what it was meant to do, and I'm going to show how our relationship has transformed that even further. So, Rob, you mind telling a little bit about what you and Annie have done?
Oh, my pleasure. And when you see leadership this effective and this capable, it's hard not to jump in, you know. So we were very interested in supporting science for the health of border populations in the borderplex area of El Paso, a large metropolitan area when you consider Juarez and the Las Cruces, the surrounding communities, certainly very large area. And so our hope was to kind of fund more of the science that addresses issues of environmental, congenital, and other diseases that are specific to people in the borderplex. And again, the excitement was that a once kind of, overly competitive situation in El Paso had turned into a wonderfully collaborative, very proactive approach to try to provide greater benefit to the greater El Paso community. So we were delighted to.
So in modesty, they provided $100,000 to fund the best science. And Heather and I said, wait a minute, we don't want to just be the best science. We want to be both institutions working together. So we doubled that, by the way.
Oh, I'm so impressed.
You could either apply for it as a single institution. 2 institutions could double the money. And again, it's just an example, I think, of our collaborations, 2 different systems, 2 different perspectives, a common goal to advance science. Now, 2 interesting things about it. We tried to ascertain what the issues were that prevented us from being successful. And one of them was the Institutional Review Board. Nobody here ever has any trouble with IRBs. And so we're describing this, again, we're sitting in my living room. We're about 16 people are eating dinner, drinking good wine. And Heather says, as the previous Secretary of the Air Force, I'm going to propose a hostage exchange. And I said, what? She says, I want my best person on my IRB to sit on your IRB. And I want your best person to sit on my IRB, so that they can resolve issues, there won't be any finger pointing, and we can facilitate that whole process. And it has worked marvelously. We've not had a single IRB complaint since the hostage exchange took place, by the way. And we call up our best people and say, you're going to be a hostage in someone else's IRB, and they loved it. Now, the other thing, sometimes it's just small things. The next major issue was parking, believe it or not. It said, we can't find a place to park next to, and you can imagine when the president calls up the parking office and says, listen, I want 5 passes tomorrow issued to UTEP, it happens. And so it's all the small little things that kind of get in the way that we were able to break down to foster these relationships. So thanks for letting us tell about it, Rob.
Well, thank you very much. And James, I've been very impressed just looking in at UNM and the close relationships with the national laboratories, and again, the huge federal investment in research, innovation, and discovery in the New Mexico area. Not only the DOE labs, but then also Department of Defense has a big branch of AFRL. So would you care to tell us more about the approach and strategy for that?
Sure. Thanks, Rob, and thanks everyone for being here this afternoon. I'm sorry, it's still this morning. One of the challenges in New Mexico is we're not a wealthy state. We're not resourced in money necessarily, but we have a wealth of institutions, a wealth of opportunities. And one of the exciting things for the University of New Mexico is to be positioned literally more or less across the street from Sandia National Lab, in the same town as Air Force Research Lab, which is both the Air Force's research lab now, but also the Space Force Research Lab. Los Alamos National Lab is up the street. NASA has activities down at White Sands. Kirkland Air Force Base is in town. So we have a lot of opportunities with federal labs, both NNSA labs in Los Alamos and Sandia, defense labs like AFRL. Those are really great opportunities for a university in multiple perspectives. So one that we shouldn't lose sight of is we produce the graduates who work at those places. And so one of the ways that we can support institutions in our state and our city is through that. And the best way to do that is to have strong partnerships so that their needs are really understood and being delivered on in education, and they have the opportunity to work with graduate students. And so one of the strategies in doing those kinds of partnerships with, say, Lange and Sandia is joint shared faculty agreements where lab technical staff can have faculty appointments at the university. University faculty can have technical staff appointments at the labs, both for research and teaching. And that gives us a lot of benefits both ways, and that's a key point in partnership, mutual benefit, and doing things together you can't do alone. We have access to facilities at those labs we wouldn't otherwise have. They have access to students through partnerships with us that they wouldn't otherwise have. And so that's a very powerful tool. Another is shared space. And so, for example, we share space with Sandia National Labs in a materials research lab. And that space is one where the students and faculty and lab staff are intimately working together on the same projects. And so that's a great opportunity for those students to have an educational experience they wouldn't otherwise have, develop new ideas and new IP that they wouldn't otherwise do, and at the same time for the labs to have very direct access to those students. Because one of the things Sandia sees, for example, is that the majority of their staff who stay are from New Mexico. They of course have scientists who come from other parts of the country, but the majority who are there for the long run are actually from New Mexico. So building those connections with graduate students from engineering, from physics, from chemistry is really powerful and important to them. And so those partnerships have mutual benefits, and it's understanding the mutual benefits that's really key to any partnership. I also think it's really important to recognize that if it only exists when there's joint money, it's not a partnership, it's a transaction.
Right.
Really, it's do you maintain the relationships over the long haul as fortunes wane and wax? And that's why, for example, mentioning going over to Heather's house and having wine with faculty from UTEP and the health science system is the right thing to do, because you're not just trying to build a transaction, you're trying to build a relationship.
Oh, that's an excellent point. And soon we'll go to questions from the audience. But as we transition to that, let me take this opportunity in the transition to ask, these are very, very powerful approaches. I mean, administratively, it builds trust, it creates great benefit for the region economically and health provision in so many different ways. Do you think these can scale readily? Do you think that this is a sort of organizational principle that can be easily adapted elsewhere?
So I certainly think that they can, and I can look around the country and see places where they do. University of Colorado's connections with I'm blocking on the name of the lab there. Thank you.
NRL,
with NRL,
Uh-huh.
the University of Tennessee's connections with Oak Ridge. So I think we see examples and models of these across the country. I think the most powerful connections do tend to be a little place-based.
Right.
Because we're human beings and we still like to hang out together. That's why we're here together in the room and not just watching on video. And so there is an element of fortune of location that I think is important. I should say that one of the challenges in these partnerships as well is around IP. So we're here at NAI, and it's worth thinking about those challenges. In any time you have shared IP, and we have something on the order of 230 shared patents with Sandia, over 50 with Los Alamos. Anytime you share IP, you get into the questions of differing philosophies about how we want to deploy that IP. We want to license, our partner doesn't. We want to assert our rights on a patent, our partner doesn't, or vice versa. Those things are real and complicated. And in the case of the national labs, they changed with kind of the fortunes of the labs. So the Department of Energy has not always been completely transparent or supportive in the way it thinks about the Bayh-Dole Act. It's sometimes supporting it, sometimes less so. And as the lab managers change, as the lab contractors change, as the line managers and then NSA change, the philosophy about how to work with IP changes too. So that's one of the things you have to navigate in these partnerships, is shifting philosophies about IP.
Interesting. Very good.
And just briefly, Rob, if you take a look at Texas, and most of you may not want to do that, but if you do, I-35 divides the state into 1/3 to the east and 2/3 to the west. There are only 2 health science centers west of I-35. The one in Lubbock that you serve at, Rob, and the one that I serve at in El Paso. So if we don't take care of West Texas, it doesn't get taken care of. So our institutions work together. We work across other institutions as well with UTEP, with regard to things like cancer prevention, COVID, mental health issues, Uvalde. All of these issues demand that we have collaborations that result in research and expanding our influence. So is it applicable? I'd say definitely. It most importantly is. And not only is it applicable, it's essential.
Very good. And especially in situations like El Paso, where administratively the Health Sciences Center and the flagship academic institution are under different administrations. The executive collaboration is so important to kind of set the tone.
And we actually consider that an advantage, because when Heather goes, she talks to the University of Texas system to get resources. I talk to Texas Tech, and then we bring those together. We double the benefits of them.
Absolutely.
And so that has been a great partnership.
Outstanding. Very good. Well, I'm looking here. Any questions? Any audience thoughts that would like to incorporate? Please, sir.
Alex Ignatz of University of Houston. Point brought up was the IP and shared IP. And how do you handle shared IP? And not only shared IP among institutions, but more critically, shared IP among an institution and an industry. Industries don't want to share IP. So how do you folks handle that?
Well, I'll push back a little bit in saying, when we say industry doesn't want to share IP, some companies don't want to share IP, some do. And so I think in the same way that we work with the labs with different philosophies at any one moment around how they want to work with IP and share IP, the same is true in working with industry. Some companies are okay sharing IP, some companies want exclusive licensing. And we'll work both models to try and maximize. I will say, as a university, when I think about licensing IP, the thing I'm actually looking for isn't revenue. Most of our IP, you don't generate a lot of net revenue from IP. What you do is try and get ideas, technologies out into the world where they make an impact. So I think about licensing from the perspective of how do I maximize the impact of this technology? And patents and IP is important because it helps your industry partner be comfortable in deploying that technology and knowing that they'll have some kind of a business advantage over using it. But I do think it's a case-by-case issue, and different companies approach this differently.
James, I'm going to make a statement, see if you agree. We always define that ahead of the time. And if you can't come to agreement beforehand, then there's not a relationship. I think you get in trouble if you try to back into it after you've done it. And that's why I think, personally, most institutions. James?
I think that's absolutely true. It's also an area that faculty sometimes find frustrating, because we spend an awful lot of time up front, and they're wanting to get going on a research project, and we're spending time figuring out the IP. I mentioned these shared faculty arrangements we have with the NNSA labs. The IP piece it's certainly the biggest part of that agreement, and getting that lined up ahead of time was critical. But having a master agreement that covers that then smooths things and makes things go quick later. But the upfront work takes time.
Very good. Karen, please.
Hi, Karen Berg, University of Georgia. So James, I love the fact that you've defined shared space, and I wondered if you could say a little bit about the logistics of how you plan that so that it's functional space that's actually used, as opposed to planning it and building it and they shall come kind of approach.
So a great question, actually, because we have some existing shared space, which is leased. It's owned by the university. It's leased from us. But we're actually creating new space to share with lab and potentially industry partners. And the way we do that is we have the lab partners in the process now as we are designing that space to begin construction, hopefully in the next 18 to 24 months. We actually have our lab partners in the room as part of that design process, and we've had them in the room from the start. So they can really define what they need. And a piece of that as well is define what they need that needs to be segregated for reasons of security, and what can be more open and shared. And we're purposefully building both kinds of space into that plan. But the key thing is, back to that notion, it's a partnership, and so we have to be in communication over what their needs actually are.
Sir.
So Anukant Dasami from University of Georgia. So when I was a department chair in another institution, so you try to promote entrepreneurship in tenured faculty to promote their intellectual property. As you know, most of the patents sits in the IP office, particularly in the life science field. The neuroscience, I like the idea of the IRB problems you solved. Is there any unique approach that you use in your institution that promotes the commercialization, takes this patents that's sitting in IP office, that goes into technology, that's inventors, normally faculty training as entrepreneur, it takes time, there are a lot of responsibilities. They don't want it to do that. But do you have any unique approach that taking the patent to be it's a product?
You want to start from a health perspective?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I don't know that I'm going to describe anything that's a unique approach, right? And so we do ICOR. We provide multiple pathways for faculty to get IP into market. And so we will pursue and get the patent and then license it to we will help you create a startup. And we provide funding opportunities to help bridge that initial step between starting a company and getting venture capital. I don't think there's unique approaches. I think those are effective approaches. I think it is important to make the entrepreneurship of faculty and students visible. And so we do an awards ceremony every year for those who got patents or copyrights or trademarks that year to celebrate them. We actually do a calendar we put together a calendar of kind of the inventors of the year, and you go through month by month, and there are some of our inventors and kind of on your wall. So I do think that's one of the pieces that can be important, is to make it visible and make their companies visible. And so, we're at pains to mention the companies that our faculty and students have started in various communications. I think some of the other programming, I wouldn't really call it unique. These are tools that a lot of universities use, but they can be effective connected with that visibility, so that faculty know that this activity is in fact important to the institution. And we go a step further. Economic development is part of our mission. And it's part of what the state expects from us. So we can also talk about this work as important to the state and not just to the institution.
And again, I don't have anything unique. I'd add, we're at an earlier stage where we have spent a lot of time just in the education, commercialization, patent process as well, for individuals who have great ideas but have never started a company before. So we're at an even earlier stage than that.
Outstanding. Well, I apologize. I know you've been patient, but unfortunately, we have to kind of stay on a pretty tight schedule. But please, I encourage you after the session, please come up and talk with us individually, please. Well, with that, let's thank our panelists. It's been a great discussion.
Thank you.
And